For days, the Hamas-run Ministry of Health, reporters and witnesses have been sounding the alarm over deaths and violence near privately run aid distribution centers in the Gaza Strip. Disturbing images have shown chaos around the U.S. and Israeli-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation aid hubs. But the Israeli military and GHF deny that anyone has been killed or injured at the distribution centers. Here's what we know about GHF's operations, leadership, funding, and the criticism it's facing amid the ongoing humanitarian crisis for Palestinians in Gaza, who UN aid agencies say are facing the risk of famine. GHF is a private organization which has been operating inside Gaza with the stated aim of delivering aid to starving Palestinians. It's been the subject of criticism from established humanitarian organizations, including United Nations agencies. But little really is publicly known about it, like who funds it. And we have not been given further clarity or granted an on-camera interview. So let's start with the situation right before GHF began its operations inside Gaza. At the end of May, Israel lifted a nearly 3-month-long full-scale blockade on humanitarian aid entering the Gaza Strip. Here's a report from May 24th, just before GHF started operating in the Gaza Strip. Israel says it carried out at least 100 strikes across Gaza over the last 24 hours. 74 people have been killed in that time, according to the Hamas-run Ministry of Health, including at least 9 members of the al-Najjar family. Child after child pulled from the rubble of their family home. 9 of 10 brothers and sisters under 12, all killed in an apparent Israeli attack. Their parents, both doctors at Gaza's Nasser hospital, where father and son now fight for their lives. The Israelis say reports of the incident are under review. Civilians in Gaza are still struggling to find food, with some bakeries firing up ovens again this week after a small amount of aid was allowed to enter the Strip, the first for nearly 3 months. That trickle met by a tidal wave of need. This bakery overwhelmed by desperate people, some banging on the front doors, others trying to break in the back, until guards fired warning shots. Elsewhere, shipments were looted by those frantic to find food. The UN Secretary General described the moment as critical.
Palestinians in Gaza are enduring what may be the cruelest phase of this cruel conflict. Families are being starved and denied the very basics, all with the world watching in real time.
Families like that of Khalid Mohammed, who Thursday said his children had gone 5 days without eating. Nobody is helping us, and we're hungry, and there's no food, he said. The situation is catastrophic. Israel says in the coming days, Nancy, private contractors will begin delivering aid from hubs concentrated in the south of Gaza. It was unclear then what GHF's operations would look like inside Gaza, apart from a plan to set up a handful of hubs in the south of the Strip, where Palestinians would have to go to receive aid. We also heard at that time that GHF was planning to hire private, armed American contractors. This raised concerns from established humanitarian workers, including UNICEF spokesperson James Elder.
It's dangerous to ask civilians to go into militarized zones to collect rations. It further entrenches forced displacement for political and military purposes, and humanitarian aid should never be used as a bargaining chip. Civilians must not be forced to flee again, and the use of humanitarian aid as a bait to force displacement, especially from the north to the south, will create this impossible choice between displacement and death.
The weekend before GHF began operating on the ground, its American director, Jake Wood, quit. Here's our report from just after Wood resigned.
The harrowing cell phone footage of 5-year-old Ward al-Sheikh al-Khalil trudging through rubble, her makeshift shelter engulfed in flames, after an Israeli strike hit the school where she and her family had fled to escape the war in Gaza. The little girl survived. Her mother and 5 siblings did not. When she returned to the scene of the attack, she found her sister's abandoned flip-flop and broke down sobbing. They all died, she wept, after a rocket fell on top of them. Under pressure from its allies, including the US, Israel began allowing in a trickle of humanitarian aid last week. The newly set up US and Israeli-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation also says it began distributing food yesterday. It's unclear how much or where, but its director, Jake Wood, resigned over the weekend, saying they could not adhere to humanitarian principles of neutrality while fulfilling their mission. It's a criticism that's also been leveled by the UN amid concerns the foundation could be used by Israel to depopulate the north of Gaza by concentrating aid distribution in the south. The situation is so desperate that this mother and child are scavenging for food. Even when they bring aid, nothing reaches us, said Islam Abu Taima. We're like stray dogs collecting food from trash. If we don't, we starve. For CBS Mornings, I'm Deborah Patter.
It wasn't long after that reports of chaotic scenes began emerging from around GHF hubs.
Chaos in southern Gaza after the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, staffed by heavily armed American contractors, lost control of one of its distribution centers in only its second day of operation. Palestinians, many left starved after nearly 3 months of an Israeli blockade on all humanitarian aid, rushed in. Israeli helicopters set off flares, and the sound of gunfire could be heard in the distance. Some Palestinians were also seen injured. Israel's military has denied shooting at the crowd, saying its nearby troops only fired warning shots. GHF's mission had already drawn sharp criticism. CBS News has learned the group has employed at least 300 American contractors. All are heavily armed, and we're told by one source they've been given, quote, as much ammunition as they can carry. In London, we spoke to James Smith, an emergency room doctor and expert in humanitarian aid. He has spent 2.5 months in Gaza since the start of the war.
Some of the people that worked for GHF have since resigned, saying that they cannot adhere to the humanitarian principles if they continue to work for this entity.
Little has been made public about GHF, including who funds it, but the group's American contractors are apparently paid around $1,000 a day for a 100-day contract.
And now we have an entity that didn't exist a couple of months ago, managed on the ground by sort of pseudo-military, almost mercenary-like individuals. All of these things are really in contravention of the basics of an ethical humanitarianism.
Now, the UN and other aid agencies have outright refused to work with GHF, saying its delivery systems violates all humanitarian principles and that the distribution hubs it set up could be used to forcibly displace Palestinians, something both GHF and Israel deny.
Around this time, there was a conversation about a possible ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas. Israel said it had agreed to a U.S.-backed framework, and Hamas raised concerns.
Well, according to a draft of the agreement that we've seen, the terms of the ceasefire include a 2-month pause in the fighting, the release of 10 living hostages, and would see over 1,000 Palestinians freed from Israeli jails. But it's what's not in the deal that is causing serious concern.
Israel's assault on Gaza continues to expand. Palestinians could be seen running in fear following the latest Israeli airstrikes across the devastated territory. As pressure grows on Hamas to accept a U.S.-brokered ceasefire deal that the Israeli government says it has agreed to. But the deal so far does not include an Israeli commitment to withdraw forces from Gaza or bring an end to the war. We live in a world that is a jungle, this man says. The peak of degeneracy is for a person to be killed with their family without anyone feeling anything for them. As the United Nations warns, Gaza is now, quote, the hungriest place on earth, saying its population of 2.3 million people face catastrophic hunger. For almost 3 months, Israel blocked nearly all food, water, and medicine from entering the besieged territory. Over the past week, it's allowed some aid in and has also allowed a U.S. and Israeli-backed group called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation to distribute food. GHF is staffed by heavily armed American contractors, and has been harshly criticized by the United Nations and other aid agencies for being, quote, against all humanitarian principles, amid chaotic scenes at GHF's distribution hubs, where the UN says dozens of Palestinians were injured in gunfire. Elon Pincus is a former Israeli diplomat.
Pushing 3 tons of pasta into Gaza is not going to change anything if it's totally disconnected from any political solution.
Now, European officials who were previously reluctant to criticize Israel are also more directly calling for an end to the war, with French President Emmanuel Macron taking it even further, saying the recognition of a Palestinian state with conditions was, and I'm quoting here, not only a moral duty, but a political necessity, a comment which has received harsh backlash from leaders here in Israel.
Now, we still didn't really know much about GHF as an organization. A document that appeared to have been circulated online by the group said it was registering as a foundation both in Delaware and in Geneva, Switzerland. We looked into documents pertaining to its Swiss operation and found that its director and accounting firm in the country had both recently resigned. Then Switzerland's Federal Supervisory Authority for Foundations, known as ESA, told us the Swiss branch of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation was not fulfilling various legal obligations in the country. When we asked GHF about it, the group said it was only using its U.S. entity and would be winding its Swiss operation down. When CBS News visited a related address in Tel Aviv, we didn't find any staff members of the organization.
We've asked the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation and its affiliate, Safe Reach Solutions, for an on-camera interview, but frankly, with no luck. Now, Safe Reach Solutions does, however, have a publicly listed address here in Israel, which we visited, and we're left with even more questions.
In central Tel Aviv, this building, undergoing extensive renovations, is the publicly listed Israeli address of Safe Reach Solutions, or SRS. We went to see if we could talk to someone from the Wyoming registered company about their operations in Gaza.
CBS News.
What we've been told is that, by the woman we've spoken to, is that there's only one person, one family in this building.
She asked us to obscure her identity to protect her privacy.
The woman who lives in this building didn't want to speak to us on camera, but what she did tell us is that there is an apartment in this building that is rented out as an Airbnb, and that a group of Americans, well-dressed Americans as she described them, stayed there for a few nights.
The company and the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation are on the ground inside Gaza, along with these armed American private security contractors.
Here they come.
Seen and heard here at a humanitarian aid distribution hub, where for 3 consecutive days there were scenes of chaos and death nearby. The bodies of those killed and injured on Sunday can be seen lying on the sand as the sun rose. The Hamas-run Ministry of Health say in total, over 100 Palestinians have been killed and hundreds more wounded since then, with almost all suffering from bullet or shrapnel wounds. GHF and the Israeli military originally denied that any violence occurred, but in a later statement, the IDF said it targeted, quote, a few individuals who posed a security threat. But a CBS News team was at the funeral of mother of 8 Rima Cross, who was shot dead on her way to retrieve an aid parcel from a GHF hub this morning. Her children now simply inconsolable.
Imtiaz, what more have you been able to find out, if you have, about the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation?
Well, what we know is that Safe Reach Solutions, the main group providing armed security in Gaza, is run by Philip Riley, a former senior CIA officer. We also know that Jake Wood, a former U.S. Marine, led fundraising for the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation up until around a week ago, when he resigned over concerns about GHF's independence. And while the names of any donors have not yet been made public, and the Israeli government has repeatedly denied providing any financial support to the group or its affiliates, we did learn that both GHF and Safe Reach Solutions are registered as companies in Delaware and Wyoming, respectively.